Hi, I'm Shanda. At my sister's signing ceremony, what was supposed to be her proudest moment, my father poured red wine all over me, right in front of everyone. He said it was to wash away the shame. Krista, she smiled. And they thought I'd just stand there, quiet, obedient, like always. But what if I told you? That night, I didn't cry. I walked up on that stage, took the mic, and in one breath, I ended their $650 million deal. I wasn't the family's disgrace. I was their biggest threat. But how did it come to this? How do you go from being the forgotten daughter to the one who shuts it all down? Stick around. There's more you need to hear. I pulled into the parking garage just as the sun dipped behind the glass towers downtown. Early spring in Houston always carried this warm haze, and for a moment it reminded me of afternoons years ago when I'd trail behind my father through these same halls, trying to match his steps. Back then, I kept telling myself that one day I'd belong here, that one day they'd look at me and see someone who mattered. I locked my car and headed toward the elevators, feeling that familiar tension in my shoulders. Before stepping in, I glanced at my phone. I'd written myself a reminder earlier that morning. Be useful, don't cause trouble. It was a phrase I'd repeated for so long, it almost felt like part of my name. Funny how a sentence could shape a life without you noticing. The doors opened to the executive floor, buzzing with movement, assistants carrying folders, teams preparing for the big ceremony tonight, people greeting Krista like she was royalty. I nodded politely at a few familiar faces, though most didn't bother to look twice. I moved down the hallway toward the conference room where the family briefing was being held. When I stepped inside, the scent of polished wood and fresh coffee drifted around me. The long mahogany table stretched across the room, each seat neatly marked with a printed nameplate, topped with the Hale crest. I walked along the side, scanning the names. Lorenzo, Krista, board members, project partners. Then I reached the end of the table. My chair was empty. No name, just a blank stretch of wood. For a second, I thought maybe someone forgot to set it out. But no, every other name was perfectly arranged, perfectly spelled, perfectly aligned. Just mine missing. Like always. I felt something fold inside me, not dramatically, just quietly, like a paper bending under too much weight. I forced a small smile and pulled out the chair anyway. A couple of people looked up when they noticed the missing nameplate, then looked away just as quickly. No one said a word. I sat down and kept my hands in my lap, steadying my breath. I'd learned long ago that drawing attention to myself only made things worse. A minute later, Krista swept into the room, that polished smile of hers already in place. You made it, Shanda. Good, she said, like she was checking attendance. Not warm, not surprised, just procedural. She took the head seat without hesitation. My father followed, flipping through a thick folder as he walked. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge me. Just sat near Krista and murmured something to her. Watching the two of them together always made me feel like I was stepping into a photograph where I didn't belong. Everyone settled in, and Krista handed out copies of the revised agenda for tonight's ceremony. This version reflects the final changes, she said, sliding one into my father's hand first. When she finally passed one to me, I scanned the pages out of habit, expecting to see my section, the remarks I'd been assigned to deliver about the project's early development. I'd helped build the original proposal years ago, often staying late to fix the pieces others overlooked. But that part was never mentioned out loud. I skimmed the schedule again. My speaking slot wasn't moved. It was gone. The line that once read, "Remarks from Shanda Hale," now said, "Family acknowledgement delivered by Krista Hale." My throat tightened, though I kept my face still. I tried to speak, just to ask when the change happened. But before I got a full word out, My father cut across the table. "We're on a tight schedule," he said, flipping another page. "Krista will handle the talking. You just be present." Present. As if my only job was to take up space quietly, like a placeholder they couldn't remove but didn't know what to do with. People around the table nodded approvingly at Krista's prepared phrases, at her polished delivery, at the confidence she never had to earn. When I tried to offer a comment about the projected timeline, two voices rose over mine instantly, shifting the conversation back to her points. Then the projector came on, casting a slide across the room, a slide I recognized instantly. I remembered designing it myself, refining numbers late into the night, double-checking forecasting until my eyes hurt. But there on the screen, beneath the image, was her name, not mine. I sat back a little, letting the voices blur as they filled the room. Part of me wanted to reach across the table and say something, anything, to remind them that I had built so much of what they were celebrating tonight. But another part of me, the part trained by years of wanting peace, whispered that I should keep my head down, that speaking up would only make me look difficult. The meeting wrapped up with chairs scraping, small talk rising, papers gathered in a rush. People filed out one by one, drifting toward the elevators or down the hallway toward the staging area. But I stayed seated for a moment. The room emptied. The hum faded. And that empty seat, the one with no nameplate, stared back at me like a quiet truth no one wanted to say out loud. I stared at it and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. More, like a realization settling into place. I whispered, barely above a breath, "Why am I always the one erased?" The words hung in the air, soft but sharp enough to sting. But that afternoon, something happened that made me realize silence had a price I could no longer afford. I left the conference room slowly, letting the echo of shuffling papers and closing doors fade behind me. My heels tapped softly against the marble floor as I made my way to the elevator. The chill in the air conditioning felt sharper now, or maybe it was just the way my skin responded to everything after that meeting. The building was familiar. I'd walked its hallways for most of my adult life, but today it felt indifferent, like it didn't recognize me either. I pressed the button for the archive floor, the basement-level wing where years of documents lived. Boxes, proposals, contracts. It was where my work always ended up, stored, forgotten. Back when I was younger, I used to volunteer to organize those files late into the evening, thinking that hard work would earn me a seat at the table someday. I'd believed that showing up, being helpful, staying quiet, it would add up to something. As I stepped out of the elevator, the lighting dimmed. The archive floor was quieter, tucked away from the buzz upstairs. A place for things that mattered once but no longer did. I walked toward the supply shelf to grab a set of packets Krista requested for the signing ceremony. I kept my head down, my hands steady. I was good at pretending things didn't bother me. "Ms. Hale," a voice behind me, soft, uncertain. I turned. It was one of the new interns, barely out of college, nervous smile, holding a beige folder like it might bite him. "I think this was, maybe for you? Or maybe not. I'm not sure. It slipped from Mr. Hale's folder earlier when he came down. He didn't notice." He held the folder out like it was radioactive. I took it without a word. He gave me a sheepish nod and walked off quickly, probably glad to be done with whatever awkwardness he'd just stumbled into. I glanced at the cover. It was unmarked. No date, no label. That alone told me it wasn't meant to be seen. I walked down the hall and slipped into an empty office, closing the door behind me. The light overhead flickered once before steadying. I sat down at the desk and opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, internal memos, meeting notes. Some pages had highlights. Some had underlines in red ink. My name was on nearly every page. not in praise, not in recognition. Each mention was clinical, strategic. Ensure Shanda remains low visibility during investor-facing events. Limit her access to early-stage development briefs. Credit distribution, Krista, primary, Shanda, support role only. And then, on a memo dated 3 years ago, Krista leads, Shanda observes, no exceptions. I sat back, pages sliding slightly across the desk under my fingers. There it was, in black and white. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't oversight. They planned it. They planned all of it. Every time I was cut out of a meeting, every time my slide deck was presented under someone else's name, every time Krista gave a speech I had written. It wasn't bad luck or bad timing. It was design, deliberate, systematic erasure. A line from another memo caught my eye. Reframe all Shanda contributions under Krista for consistency and brand alignment. Brand alignment. Like I was a liability to the image they wanted to sell. I felt my breath slow, not panicked, not shaky, just still. My hands were still on the pages, but I couldn't feel them. It was like everything I thought I knew about the past 10 years was unraveling right in front of me. Every late night, every silent sacrifice, every time I told myself to stay quiet, to let Krista shine. I used to think I wasn't assertive enough, that maybe I needed to do more, but I was never the problem. They'd made sure I couldn't win. I stood up, gathering the pages carefully, like they might crumble if I moved too fast. The office door opened without a sound. I walked back upstairs, past the same polished walls, past the portraits of men in suits who'd run this company before Krista and Lorenzo decided I was more useful in the shadows. I didn't even think about it. My feet took me toward my father's office. The hallway leading there was empty. I paused just outside the door, the file still in my hands. Inside, I heard their voices. Krista first, light, amused. "She'll be fine. She likes being invisible. It keeps things simple." Lorenzo answered without hesitation. "As long as she doesn't interfere tonight, we can't risk confusion." I didn't move, not 1 inch. There it was again, not just in writing now, but out loud, spoken like it was fact. They hadn't just planned to erase me. They'd gotten used to it, comfortable, like I was never meant to exist beyond the edges of their spotlight. I stood there for another minute, and then I turned and walked away. Not out of defeat, out of clarity. If they'd already taken everything they could from me, what was I still afraid of? I stepped outside the building just as the sky turned a deep amber. The sun was lowering behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I got into my car, shut the door, and placed the folder on the passenger seat like it was something sacred. I stared at it for a long moment, then whispered, "Maybe I'm invisible because I agreed to be." It wasn't a declaration, not yet, but it was the beginning of a question. And questions, real ones, have a way of leading somewhere. But that night, something else happened. Something that showed me they weren't finished taking from me. I sat there in my car for a few more minutes, the interior growing dim as the sun slid lower. The folder on the passenger seat seemed to breathe with the light, each page glowing faintly before the dusk folded over it. I touched the cover once, then started the engine. The drive downtown wasn't long, but the weight of what I'd read followed me like a second shadow. Streetlights were turning on as I pulled onto the main road, their glow catching the dashboard in soft flashes. I kept replaying that line, "She likes being invisible," as if hearing it again might soften it somehow. It didn't. By the time I reached the hotel garage, guests were already arriving. Men in suits, women in evening dresses, cheerful voices echoing up the ramp. Everyone looked so sure of their place here. I sat for a moment before stepping out, smoothing my jacket, steadying my breath. I'd rehearsed this routine my whole life. Show up, smile, don't make trouble. But tonight, that familiar armor felt thin. I walked through the glass doors into the lobby. The marble floor reflected the chandelier light, warm and polished. Staff members moved briskly, checking name tags, guiding guests toward the ballroom. I recognized many faces, employees who'd been here as long as I had, but their greetings were polite and distant, like I was a familiar stranger. Maybe that's exactly what I'd become. "Good evening," someone murmured as they passed. Another offered a quick nod before turning to greet Krista near the stage. She already had a circle around her, smiling wide, perfectly framed by the event lights. I kept moving. I wasn't here to orbit her anymore. Near the registration table, a young woman handed programs to arriving guests. When it was my turn, she didn't even glance up, just extended one toward me. "Here you go, ma'am." I took the brochure, thanked her out of habit, and stepped aside. The cover shimmered under the ballroom light, dark blue with silver lettering, Hale Industries, a new milestone. My hands opened it slowly. Page after page listed the schedule for the night: investor introductions, keynote, media segment, special acknowledgments, then a section titled The Hale Sisters. I paused there, expecting to see what had always been included, a short line at least, noting my involvement in the original proposal. Even when they downplayed my work, they used to include me somewhere. But tonight, only one biography filled the page. Only one photo, only one name: Krista Hale. Not a trace of me, not even a footnote. I stared at that page so long the text began to blur. A soft buzz filled my ears, not loud, just steady, like the hum of something breaking quietly. This wasn't a slip. This wasn't an oversight. This was erasure, deliberate and complete. Two guests nearby flipped through their own programs. One of them chuckled, softly. "Krista really built something big here." The other nodded. "She's impressive. Didn't even know she had a sister." I felt my throat tighten, a small ache rising that I forced back down. I didn't turn toward them. I didn't correct them. I just stood there, letting their words settle into the empty space where my name should have been. It was strange, like watching my life get rewritten in real time, each omission tugging a thread loose. I closed the program and walked toward the displays near the stage. Large boards showcased the company's achievements, all arranged neatly in gold frames. The title above them read The Hale Leadership Team. Years ago, I believed that title meant all of us. Tonight, I knew better. I reached out and touched the edge of one frame, my fingers brushing against the glossy surface. "How many times did you all do this to me?" The question came out in a whisper, not angry, just tired. The kind of tired that sinks into your bones. A memory surfaced, uninvited but sharp. I was 12, Krista was 14. She built a volcano for the school science fair, and the eruption mechanism jammed the night before. I stayed up with her fixing it. I was the one who figured out the tubing pressure. But the next day, when she won, everyone talked about how brilliant she was, how creative. I'd clapped the loudest. I remembered thinking, it doesn't matter who gets the credit as long as we win. But maybe that night wasn't an exception. Maybe it was the beginning. I stepped back from the display, breathed slowly, and pulled my phone from my bag. The original proposal file I'd drafted still sat in my cloud drive. I opened it and scrolled through the paragraphs, my words, my structure, my research. Seeing them mirrored across the room under someone else's name hit me harder than I expected, like a quiet punch just beneath the ribs. For a long moment, I didn't move. The ballroom blurred around the edges. Conversations rose and fell like distant waves. Then something inside me shifted, not a dramatic spark, not rage, just clarity. "I'm done apologizing for existing," I murmured. Saying it didn't solve anything, but it steadied me. It was the first sentence I'd spoken tonight that felt like it belonged to me. I closed the program, tucked it under my arm, and stepped away from the crowd. The ceremony hadn't even started, and already they'd stripped me from it. But I was beginning to see the pattern clearly. And patterns, once exposed, lose their power. And just when I thought the erasing was complete, I discovered they had planned something far worse. I stood near the edge of the ballroom, the noise of the crowd pulsing like a steady drumbeat under the chandeliers. People moved from table to table, greeting each other, picking up their programs, sipping champagne. Life went on around me as if nothing were out of place. As if I hadn't just realized my own family was rewriting our story on paper without me. I needed air, not outside, just away from the buzzing room. I slipped through a side door into a hallway leading toward the backstage area. The carpet muted my steps, giving me a small pocket of quiet. The event brochure was still in my hand, creased slightly from where I'd gripped it too tightly. I didn't look at it again. I'd seen enough. I walked past 2 staff members adjusting lighting racks. One of them greeted me politely, the kind of quick acknowledgement that didn't invite conversation. I nodded back and kept moving. My thoughts circled the same question over and over. How long has my own family decided I don't belong in it? But underneath that question was something new, a sharpness, an alertness I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't drifting anymore. I was noticing. Near the end of the hallway was a narrow table, one that staff usually used to sort staging notes and badges. Tonight it was piled with folders, most labeled with routine logistics. But the top one was different, thick cardstock, stamped with a red header, confidential. Normally, I would have walked right past it. I'd been trained my whole life to touch less, ask less, stay smaller. But tonight, that old instinct felt outdated. My hand moved before my doubts could catch up. I picked up the folder. The weight of it was surprising, dense, important. I glanced around. No one was watching closely. I stepped back toward the wall and opened it just enough to see the first page. Legal documents, draft agreements, a restructuring plan. My eyes ran down the text. One sentence, highlighted in bright yellow, felt like a fist closing around my lungs. All signatory authority shall be delegated to Krista Hale. Family participation limited to ceremonial presence only. Under the list of those ceremonial participants, only 2 names appeared: Lorenzo Hale, Krista Hale. I scanned the page again, searching for my own name, even knowing I wouldn't find it. Nothing. Not even a courtesy mention, not even a symbolic role. So that was it. I wasn't just being overlooked tonight. I had been intentionally removed from every part of the future. This wasn't about a speech or a missing nameplate. This was the final stage of pushing me out completely. A steadiness came over me, not calm, not acceptance. Something else, something that felt like stepping out of a fog. I thought they erased me because I wasn't loud enough, I whispered. Now I understand. They erased me because it was easier than admitting I was part of everything they built. And saying it out loud cleared something in me. The betrayal didn't feel personal anymore. It felt strategic, calculated, cold. I didn't hear the footsteps behind me until a voice cut the air. "What are you doing with that?" Krista. She stood there with that polished expression she'd worn for years, charming on the surface, but tight around the eyes. I didn't hide the folder. I didn't even close it all the way. "I'm reading the parts where I don't exist," I said. Her smile twitched, not vanishing, but changing. Less warm, more practiced. "Shanda, tonight is important. Don't make this about you." She reached out and took the folder from my hands like she had every right to it. "You're here to support the family narrative," she said lightly. "That's how it's always worked." Her tone wasn't condescending. That almost made it worse. She believed what she was saying. To her, this wasn't cruelty. It was structure, order, the way things were supposed to be. I stepped closer, not aggressive, just enough that she had to meet my eyes. The family narrative shouldn't require erasing me, I said. That got her. Her smile slipped, only slightly, but enough to show she'd heard me in a way she hadn't expected to. Before she could respond, Lorenzo called out from down the hall. Staff hurried toward him with clipboards and headsets. He walked over, his expression focused, businesslike. "We're about to bring everyone in," he said. Then he looked directly at me. "Let's keep everything smooth tonight. No surprises. Krista carries the leadership. You stand with the family. That's it." He didn't wait for my reaction. He turned and kept walking, waving people into place. His words hung in the air like a warning disguised as direction. I stood there for a moment, feeling something tighten, not fear, not shame. Something firmer. If they wanted no surprises, they shouldn't have made me one. I walked back toward the ballroom, each step steady, each breath slower. It wasn't confidence, it wasn't bravado. It was clarity taking shape. From the doorway, I watched my father shaking hands with investors, his face bright with pride. Krista stood nearby, framed perfectly by the stage lights, the center of attention. I looked at the screens, the banners, the tables, the branding. Pieces of a world I had helped build, one long night at a time. My invisibility used to feel inevitable. Now it felt like a choice, just not mine. A tension rose in my chest, not painful, but directional, like something inside me finally pointing forward instead of inward. They thought they'd finished rewriting me out of the story. But this wasn't the ending. It was the first time I'd truly seen the beginning. And then came the moment that pushed everything over the edge, the warning I gave them, and the line they crossed anyway. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, just close enough to see the crowd settling in, but far enough to feel removed from it all. My heels were planted, but I couldn't shake the sensation that the floor beneath me wasn't steady. Maybe because everything I believed about family had started to shift, one document, one omission, one lie at a time. The confidential folder was no longer in my hands, but I still felt it. That weight, that truth, pressed into my chest like a reminder I couldn't shake. They expected me to sit quietly, smile, fade into the background. But tonight, for the first time in my life, the cost of silence finally felt heavier than the cost of speaking. Krista was just a few feet away, adjusting her dress and whispering something to the photographer. She was glowing in that polished way of hers, but something in her posture, too rigid, too rehearsed, told me she was guarding something. I didn't wait. I stepped forward and caught her eye. "Krista," I said, voice low, "we need to talk. Now." She blinked, caught off guard, but quickly masked it with a smile for the room before turning to me. "Right now?" "Yes," I said, already walking toward a quieter corner. She followed, curious, maybe, or just wanting to keep me from making a scene. Behind us, the ballroom buzzed with soft laughter and clinking glasses. We stopped near a wall just out of the crowd's sight. I didn't waste time. "This is the last time you get to erase me. If you cross that line again tonight, I won't stay quiet." She froze. Not because of the words. I'd said similar things before, though never this directly, but because of my tone. I wasn't asking, I wasn't explaining. "You're overreacting," she said carefully. "This is business." "Business," I repeated, stepping closer, "doesn't require diminishing me." Her eyes narrowed, just for a second. Then came the sound I'd heard too many times in my life, a small, dismissive laugh, meant to make me feel foolish for caring. And just like that, something snapped. Not out loud, not in anger. But inside me, I felt the shift. I wasn't lost in it anymore. I wasn't wondering if I'd misunderstood or if I'd been too sensitive, or if I was reading too much into things. No, this time I was certain. For once, my voice didn't waver, my hands didn't fidget. If you want this family narrative, Krista, keep it. But don't expect me to stand in it quietly anymore. That hit her, not like a slap, but like a leak in a carefully sealed plan. Her smile thinned. She wasn't afraid. She was irritated. Krista had always hated losing control more than anything else. She turned away, adjusted the hem of her sleeve with calm, precise fingers. "I'll handle everything," she said over her shoulder. "Just stay out of the way." And with that, she walked straight toward the stage. A staff member handed her a mic, and she nodded, poised and radiant, her image flickering to life on the ballroom's 2 massive screens. The host's voice echoed through the space. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Krista Hale, leading partner and visionary behind tonight's success." Polite applause filled the room as she stepped forward. I remained near the edge of the room, where the shadows gathered just before the lights. She started her speech with the usual platitudes, thanking investors, naming consultants, praising the staff, all lines she'd no doubt practiced to perfection. Then, with that smooth tone she'd mastered over decades, she said, "And my sister, Shanda, who has always done her best to support us in small but meaningful ways." My heart didn't race, my face didn't flush, but something inside me stiffened like a wall going up brick by brick. Small but meaningful. A curated insult, dressed as appreciation. Several guests glanced my way, some curious, others sympathetic. One older man gave me a nod I couldn't quite read. Pity, maybe? Recognition? It didn't matter. That moment, those 4 words, cut deeper than silence ever could. Because now, it wasn't just about pretending I didn't matter. It was about defining how little I mattered, publicly, for everyone to hear. And I stood there, feeling the burn in my chest, not from shame, but from knowing. That was the moment I understood they didn't just want to ignore me. They wanted to write my role for me, shrink it, decorate it, then box it up in a corner labeled harmless. I looked around the room, at all the people who thought they were seeing a complete picture. I thought about how many of them assumed I was the passive one, the less successful one, the sister who tagged along rather than built. Because that's the version Krista had told them. Over years, quietly, strategically. And I had helped by staying silent. No more. I took a breath and stepped forward, just a few feet closer to the stage, into the light's reach but still outside the center. Krista's gaze swept the room as she moved to her final remarks and then landed on me. Just for a second, her voice faltered, half a beat. That was enough. I didn't need to speak, not yet. Just being there, refusing to shrink, shifted the air. I whispered to myself, barely audible, "If they want a stage, they'll get one." But they didn't listen to my warning, and what they did next shattered any illusion of family left in me. The applause from Krista's speech hadn't even finished echoing when I saw him. The way Lorenzo rose from his seat like a man stepping onto a pulpit. He held a wineglass in one hand, the deep red liquid catching the chandelier light above him like it was part of the ceremony. To everyone else, it looked ceremonial. To me, it looked loaded. He moved toward the microphone with the same ease I'd seen for years, all charm and confidence, rehearsed and polished. But I could tell the mask was just that, thin, trembling at the edges. His eyes searched the room as he began one of his self-aggrandizing family speeches. Then they landed on me, and I knew that look. I'd seen it when I was 14, and he blamed me for Krista's missed recital. I'd seen it when I questioned a clause in a board meeting and got cut off mid-sentence. It was the look he wore when he needed someone to carry the weight of his discomfort, someone expendable. He smiled toward me, wide and hollow. "Shanda," "Come on up here," he called out through the mic, voice warm like honey, but sharp underneath. The guests murmured. A few turned their heads with interest. I caught the eye of one of the consultants who gave me a half smile, clearly unsure if this was part of the show. I stood still for a beat, remembering the promise I made to myself earlier. If they crossed the line, I would not stay quiet. But I stepped forward anyway, not out of submission, out of strategy. I wasn't going to run from whatever this was. As I walked to the stage, the lights shifted slightly, following me, making me visible in a way I hadn't been all night. Lorenzo extended his arm, wineglass held high like some twisted offering. I barely had time to blink. He tilted it forward, without ceremony, without hesitation, and poured the entire glass down the front of my dress. Gasps broke through the ballroom like shattered glass. The dark red spread across the pale fabric, seeping down my torso like a wound. The cold of it didn't hit as hard as the silence that followed. Krista brought her hand to her mouth, eyes wide, but I saw the truth behind it, the twitch at the corner of her lips. She wasn't horrified, she was pleased. Lorenzo turned back to the microphone, still smiling, and said clearly, "To wash away the family shame before we enter a new era." The laughter that followed wasn't loud. It was awkward, uneasy. Some chuckled to fill the silence. Some turned away. A few looked at me like I was the punchline of a joke they didn't quite understand. It wasn't the wine that burned. It was the ease, the efficiency, with which he sacrificed me for a moment of control. I stood there, motionless, dress soaked, chest rising and falling slowly. Krista stepped forward then, wrapping one arm behind Lorenzo like it was a harmless bit of theater. "Dad's just being theatrical," she said with a shrug, eyes sweeping the room. "Shanda understands." That sentence, those two words, landed harder than the wine ever could. Shanda understands. I looked at her, looked straight into her face, and for once, I didn't see the golden child or the perfect heir. I saw a woman who'd learned to stay powerful by keeping others small. I saw someone who had never once, not once, stepped between me and the fire. I took a breath, a steady, clear breath. "I spent years believing silence kept peace," I said quietly. But peace built on my silence was never peace. It was obedience. And then, instead of turning to leave, instead of shrinking into the shame they tried to drape over me, I did something else. I reached for a second wineglass sitting on the table beside the podium. The crowd tensed. Krista's eyes widened. For a moment, everyone thought I might throw it, but I didn't. I placed it firmly into Lorenzo's hand. Not roughly, not gently, just deliberately. I leaned in close, speaking low enough that only the front row could hear. "You're going to wish tonight ended with that stunt." And I smiled. Not a fake one, not a performative one, a real one. The kind that rises when you know you're finally stepping out from under someone's shadow. The tension in the room shifted, crackled. Something in the air felt different now. Not fear, not drama, just accountability. Krista stepped in again, lowering her voice sharply. "Don't make this worse, Shanda." I looked at her, eyes steady, voice even. I'm not the one who poured the wine. And for the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I wasn't surviving. I was choosing. The quiet in the room was heavy. People weren't sure if they should clap or pretend they didn't see what just happened. I turned and stepped down from the stage. The wine kept dripping down the hem of my dress as I walked back through the ballroom. But I didn't reach for a napkin. I didn't run for the restroom. I let every guest see it. They wanted to mark me with shame. Instead, they marked themselves. No one tried to stop me. Some parted their bodies to let me pass without touching the wine-stained fabric. Some watched in silence. One woman near the back whispered something to her husband, eyes wide. I didn't care what they said anymore. I walked straight toward the back hallway, away from the stage, away from the manufactured legacy they'd been building. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was losing anything. I felt like I'd just found something, a kind of permission to stop shielding them from consequences, to stop hoping they would become something they're not, to stop apologizing for my presence, my work, my name. I didn't need their table anymore. I'd build my own. And while I cleaned the wine from my hands, they launched the cruelest attack yet. The restroom was quiet, too quiet for a ballroom full of people, pretending nothing had just happened. I stood at the sink, letting the warm water run over my hands as streaks of red slid down the porcelain like old blood. I didn't scrub hard. I wasn't trying to erase anything. I just wanted to feel grounded, solid. My reflection stared back at me, but something about her looked changed. Not broken, just still. Colder than usual. Not numb exactly, but emptied of the old softness. The part that once hoped they'd come around. The part that used to wait for fairness. That part had left the building the moment Lorenzo tipped that wine glass over my chest. Humiliation doesn't silence me anymore. It informs me. I turned off the tap, shook the water from my fingers, and grabbed a paper towel when the door burst open. "Shanda!" The young event coordinator gasped, flushed and shaking. "You need to know. They're telling people you lost it." I blinked. "What?" "They said you grabbed at your father," she whispered, eyes wide. "They told press you were emotional, unstable. They're spinning it like you tried to ruin the ceremony." I just stood there. It was happening again, but this time not behind closed doors or within the family circle. This was out in the open, with strangers and cameras and headlines. Lorenzo had poured the wine in front of everyone, but now Krista was feeding reporters a version of the story where I was the aggressor, where I'd snapped. I reached for my phone, still tucked into my clutch, the screen lit up with missed calls. 3 from Alicia, my colleague, the one who'd gone out on a limb to recommend me for the education initiative. 1 text message, "Board saw the article. We need to talk." My stomach tightened. It wasn't just personal now. They weren't satisfied with shaming me as a daughter. They needed to erase me professionally. They were pulling the rug out from every piece of ground I had built on my own. This wasn't fallout. This was sabotage. I walked fast, past the catering setup, down the backstage hallway toward the AV booth where I knew Krista would be hovering. She always did before big announcements. That's where the lighting decisions were made, the camera angles discussed. Sure enough, she was standing there, one hand adjusting her hair, the other holding a cue card. "You feeding lies to the press now?" I asked, my voice level. She turned, not startled, just mildly inconvenienced. "Damage control," she said like she was explaining traffic. "Dad's thing was over the top. People needed a reason to laugh it off. You gave them one." I stepped closer. "No," I said. "You gave them me." She tilted her head, almost amused. "You're not part of the deal. You know that. They didn't need you. I tried to let you stand beside us. Quietly. You chose otherwise." She didn't flinch. Not once. And just like that, the truth stopped being hidden. It came out of her mouth like it had been waiting for years. I stood there, breathing, trying not to let the old feelings win, the ones that told me maybe I had ruined things. Maybe I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. But then I looked down at my dress, still stained, still cold, and I remembered I didn't embarrass this family. They embarrassed themselves. A technician stepped out from behind the curtain, holding a black folder. "This was left on the signing table," he said quietly. "Thought you should see it." He handed it to me, eyes avoiding mine. Inside was a printed one-pager, labeled in all caps, "In case of Shanda Hale interference." My pulse slowed as I read each bullet point. Past emotional volatility, disruptive at family events, unstable when stressed, inappropriate conduct with board staff. They had this ready before I ever stepped into the ballroom. They didn't improvise this lie, they rehearsed it. I flipped to the back page, handwritten notes, talking points, exact phrases to use in press responses. They planned to destroy my credibility so they could finalize the signing without any scrutiny from me. I felt dizzy, not from shock, but from clarity. All the blurred lines sharpened at once. It wasn't a family disagreement. It was a calculated removal. I looked up, and that's when I saw it. On Krista's wrist, my mother's bracelet. The one she gave me the year before she passed. The one she made sure was left for me and me alone. I'd worn it at every important moment since. But I hadn't worn it tonight, thinking it might get caught on fabric. Now it was gleaming on Krista's wrist like a cruel trophy. She saw me staring. Loud enough for a nearby staff member to hear, she said, "You know, maybe if you hadn't stolen Mom's bracelet all those years ago, people wouldn't be so quick to believe the worst about you." My jaw didn't drop. I didn't gasp. I just watched. Watched her lie with ease. Watched the nearby coordinator glance at me with hesitation. Watched Lorenzo, standing 20 feet away, nod faintly, like he approved. That bracelet had been my tether. A quiet reminder that someone once saw me, that I had value. Now they were using it, she was using it, as evidence I was the kind of person who'd steal from her own family. And something inside me shifted. I didn't want their understanding anymore. I didn't crave their approval. I didn't even care about repairing the image they were so desperate to distort. I cared about truth. "Destroy my credibility?" I said under my breath. "Fine, but you won't destroy my truth." Just then, another coordinator came jogging down the hallway. "Krista's calling the press to the stage," she said, winded. "She wants to address the incident." Of course she did. They were going to turn my humiliation into their platform. Use my silence as a step stool to secure the deal. Maybe even get a few headlines about Krista's grace under pressure. I turned and walked back toward the ballroom, not to argue, not to defend, but to end what they had built on my silence. So I walked toward the stage, not to defend myself, but to end everything they'd built on my silence. I waited until the room fell quiet, then reached for the microphone they never meant for me to touch. The lights were hot. The ballroom, so polished just moments ago, now felt like a pressure cooker. Faces turned, some familiar, some just curious. But most had already chosen their version of the truth before I even opened my mouth. Krista stood center stage, her white suit still flawless, her smile carefully calibrated. She pressed her hand gently against her chest, right where my mother's bracelet shimmered under the lights, like she'd earned it, like it belonged there. "I'm so sorry for the disruption tonight," she said, in that practiced voice she always used when lying to reporters or our grandmother. This was supposed to be a celebration, but unfortunately, my sister has struggled with misconduct issues for years, and we hoped to keep it private out of love. A few people gasped. Others nodded slightly, like this all made sense now, like they'd been waiting to hear something that confirmed what they already wanted to believe. I felt the heat rise in my chest. Not panic, not shame. Just a sharp, clear stillness. They'd rehearsed this. I could see it in her body language, in the soft pauses designed for sympathy, in the way her voice dipped just enough to sound wounded. Let her talk. Let her perform. Then Lorenzo joined her, stepping up with that slow, rehearsed solemnity of a man who'd pretended to be the patriarch for far too long. In his hands was a thick folder, my name printed neatly on the front. "For transparency," he began, his tone the exact mix of authority and condescension he'd used on me since I was 10. We want our partners to know that we take mental stability and ethical conduct seriously. He lifted the top sheet. I recognized it immediately. Doctored HR complaints, emails I'd never written, signatures that weren't mine. As much as we've tried to shield Shanda, he continued, we cannot allow personal instability to derail a project this important. There it was. Their final act. Discredit the only person who knew enough to stop them. I didn't look at them. I looked at the guests, the board members, consultants, extended family, people who'd known me since I was a child. And I watched the shift. Some looked away, some stared with concern. But most just slid quietly into the more convenient narrative, the one that made them safe, the one where they didn't have to choose sides. People don't need truth, they just need permission to believe whatever makes them comfortable. And strangely, that freed me. I took a breath, stepped closer to the mic. My sister's right, I said calmly. Tonight should be transparent. Krista stiffened. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. Lorenzo didn't move, but his fingers tightened around the folder. I reviewed the deal you're about to sign, I continued, my voice steady. The terms changed 3 weeks ago. The controlling interest was shifted without board approval. That alone violates multiple federal disclosure laws. You could feel the room pause, like a collective intake of breath no one wanted to exhale. From the front row, I saw one of the legal reps shift forward, tablet in hand. I looked directly at him. Any party that signs this contract, knowing the financial statements were altered, becomes complicit in securities fraud. So if you're still planning to move ahead, I'd suggest you call your own counsel, right now. Silence. Then murmurs. Phones came out. Eyes darted. Krista's voice cracked slightly as she snapped. You don't know what you're talking about. I turned to face her. I do, I said. I have the original agreements, the version submitted for internal review, and the email trail showing the exact moment the numbers were edited. I held up my phone, not to wave it around like proof, but simply to show that I wasn't bluffing. Lorenzo leaned in. Stop this, he muttered, too quiet for the crowd to hear. You'll ruin everything. I didn't blink. You already did. His face lost its color, and I turned back to the room. As the rightful co-owner of Hale Innovations, I said, letting the words fall like stone, with full legal authority under the 2019 Charter Amendment, I waited, let the moment breathe. I am canceling this deal. Gasps echoed. A woman's hand flew to her mouth. Someone dropped a pen. The whole room froze. Krista's eyes widened. She clutched the bracelet like it might save her, like it was still a symbol of something true. But that bracelet didn't tell their story anymore. It told mine. It told my mother's. Because strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it waits. It watches. And then it shows up exactly when it's needed. From behind the stage, executives started moving. One of them barked out a request to see the documents. Reporters scrambled to get a better angle. The chaos grew fast, louder, sharper, messier. But I didn't move. I stood there, still. In the center of the storm they created, with my own hands clean and my voice finely used. And in the middle of the uproar, my father said the one sentence that hit harder than the wine he threw on me. He whispered, "You were never meant to survive without us." His voice barely carried beyond the space between us, but the meaning settled inside me with a strange, heavy calm. It wasn't anger, it wasn't regret, it was ownership. A confession of what he'd believed all along, that my place in this family existed only if it kept me dependent and predictable. For a moment, I just looked at him. The roar of the ballroom faded behind us. Lawyers arguing, executives on their phones, Krista trying to rebuild her crumbling image. It all blurred. What stayed sharp was his face, the certainty in it. I felt an old ache rise, then loosen. I wasn't the family disgrace, I was the family threat. And now that truth didn't frighten me, it clarified everything. The chaos around us quickly swallowed the quiet between us. Counsel surrounded Krista, pulling up the charter amendment I'd cited. One of them blanched, scrolling fast, and whispered to another, "She's right." Krista's voice trembled as she turned toward me. "You planned this," she snapped, her hands shaking just enough to crack the mask she always wore. "I adapted," I said. "There's a difference." She stared at me like she didn't recognize who I'd become. Behind her, Lorenzo argued with two executives who wanted answers he couldn't provide. The smear they'd crafted was dissolving faster than they could defend it. Krista reached into her purse suddenly, her motion sharp. When she turned back, she held out my mother's bracelet. Not gently, more like an offering meant to fix what she'd broken. "I'm giving it back," she said. "You win. Take it." I shook my head. "I don't need it back. It never proved anything about me. Only about you." For the first time tonight, Krista didn't have a ready answer. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words found their way out. My father stepped closer, gripping my arm, not in anger, but desperation. "You've destroyed your sister's future," he said. "Do you understand that?" I met his eyes, steady. "No, I stopped you from laundering a lie through her career. She deserved better. So did I." He let go, slowly, like he was realizing he'd lost something he never thought could slip away. Around us, people murmured. The tone had shifted. I wasn't being looked at as the unstable sister anymore. I was being seen as the one holding the truth, the one who refused to collapse the way they expected. A woman in the crowd whispered to another, "They tried to bury her." "Not anymore," the other replied. The noise became suffocating, and I stepped away, not running, just creating distance. I headed through the side doors and out onto the terrace. Warm Houston air wrapped around me, freeing me from the overheated tension inside. The skyline blinked under the night, steady and indifferent. My dress was stiff with dried wine. My hands still faintly smelled of it, but I felt whole in a way I hadn't in years. "I walked into this building invisible," I murmured. "I'm leaving scene." I touched my wrist where the bracelet used to rest. Tonight it wasn't comfort. It had been weaponized. Then it became irrelevant. Sometimes healing isn't reclaiming what was stolen. It's realizing you no longer need the symbol at all. The terrace door eased open behind me. I didn't turn until I heard her voice. "Shanda, was there ever a way we could have been close?" Krista's words were soft, not manipulative, just tired. She looked smaller without the lights, without the audience. Just a woman who'd spent her entire life confusing dominance with love. "Maybe," I said after a moment, "but not if you believed my silence was your advantage." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She just nodded once, like she finally understood something she should have realized years ago. Then she stepped back, giving me space she'd never given me before. From the ballroom, security escorted Lorenzo toward a group of investigators waiting in a side corridor. Executives postponed the deal indefinitely. I caught glimpses of stunned reporters huddling with their teams, rewriting tonight's story in real time. My phone buzzed. A message from my board. "We need to meet first thing in the morning. We support you." I exhaled, long and slow. When I stepped back inside, the ballroom had dimmed. Guests were collecting their coats, talking in hushed voices. The carpet where the wine hit earlier had already dried, proof of how quickly a moment turns into memory. Proof that what felt permanent rarely was. I stopped in the center of the room, letting the quiet settle. I thought I came tonight to support, I whispered to myself. But I came to wake up. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their story. I didn't need to carry their shame. Only my name. And for once, that felt like enough. As the last guests drifted out, I realized the silence in the room wasn't empty. It was mine.